Okay, I think we can start. So, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to the SPN Round Table. Thank you for sending your questions and being so active in preparing this session. Today, we will discuss science communication in our society, and the session will be moderated by Sara Champalimaud. And I would like to now share the floor with Sara.
Okay. So good afternoon to everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here and to introduce our speakers that kindly accepted this invitation. And so first I will introduce Hedi Young. So he studied biology at the University of Oxford and worked as a researcher and a producer on BBC documentaries, even before earning his master in cognitive neuroscience at UCL and then a PhD in neuroscience at Champalimaud Foundation. And is now a science communicator at Champalimaud Foundation. He writes on topics from AI to psychedelics, for international media, delivers TED Talks, and leads science communication workshops. And he is also the creator and host of the Living Through Science, a video podcast featuring conversations with popular science authors. So thank you so much, Hedi. It's very, I already was discussing a bit with Hedi before. It's very, very interesting background. So thank you so much for being here. I also have the pleasure. Yeah, thank you. And we also have Joaquim Alves Silva. So Joaquim is my co-partner in the direction of the Portuguese Society for Neuroscience. He's the leader of neuronal circuit dysfunction at the Champalimaud Research Program, also associate professor at Nova Medical School, and secretary of the SPN. He's trained as a psychiatrist. His research combines system neuroscience approach to study how circuit dysfunction leads to movement disorders such as Parkinson's disease. And he recently received very prestigious grant, ERC, so we are all very proud. And thank you, Joaquim, also for accepting this invitation. And finally, last but not least, I have the great pleasure to introduce Rui. So Rui was my first PhD student, so very happy to also host him here. He is a molecular and behavioral neuroscientist who has been always, and I could see that, very passionate about science communication. He earned his PhD here in University of Lisbon and is currently a Marie Slowicka Curie postdoctoral fellowship at University of Bordeaux, and he investigates how endocannabinoid system regulates defensive and coping behaviors. And of course, he's here because he is the founder of Fala-me Neuro, which was something that he came to talk with me in 2020, I think, about this project, which is now a non-profit organization promoting neuroscience literacy in Portugal. So thank you, Rui, also for being here. So we had a lot of questions coming from our members, and I will start. So I was organizing because some questions, we had a lot of questions going for the misinformation. Okay, so misinformation crisis, that a lot of people were saying that we have this current crisis. Okay, and so one of the questions was, how can we teach children to be critical of this misinformation? So I would start with you, Hedi. So what is your idea, first about this misinformation? And one of the questions was specifically for children, and then I have other questions also about this misinformation, but thinking that really we need to start to teach from the young ages. So what can we do and how do you see this?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? I think that one of the most effective ways to help kids become critical of misinformation is to make questioning a habit rather than something they only do in schools. So getting them to ask simple questions like, who's saying this, or how do we know this particular fact? What would change your mind if I told you this? So rewarding questions as much as the answers, I think is one way of going about that. And doing a lot of lateral reading, what we call lateral reading. So if they come across something, then make sure that they check other sources online or wherever they may have got that information. And trying really to get them to think for themselves. I think that's a skill which, and I think it's actually made easy by the fact that as kids, we tend to be very questioning people. We never cease to ask questions. So I think that should be encouraged. And so another kind of practical exercise you might do is myth busting. So, for example, we've all familiar with myths such as, I don't know, the Loch Ness Monster, for example. You know, that's a big one in the UK. I don't know how big it is in Portugal, but the Loch Ness Monster was a kind of monster that a mythical creature that which I believed in as a child, and it was only through reading and chatting with adults that I actually realized that there is no Loch Ness Monster. So kind of taking a practical exercise like that, for example, and why is there no Loch Ness Monster? Well, there's a photograph here, but that doesn't actually necessarily mean that it's a real kind of dinosaur. So just kind of picking apart the reasons for why we believe things, I think can really help tackle misinformation, which I'm sure we'll go on to discuss is really a big issue these days.
Yeah, thank you. Rui, so what do you think about, and now going to the other point, which is elderly. So how can we also help them so that they don't fall on this? Because in our days, everybody has, or most of the people have this social network, and a lot of the elderly are really being affected and highly affected about this misinformation. So what do you think is the best way?
Can I just pick up on the last question?
Yes, of
just
course.
to add a little thing. I think we as well, I'm not a father myself, so I don't know how to handle kids yet. So, but I would say that in that there's a certain age period where kids just go on and ramble about the why things happen, right? And we as adults tend to kind of push that away a little bit and not really foster that critical thinking, I would say. And also, as Hedi was mentioning, we actually need to tackle this not only as parents but also in schools. I think that's a major issue at the moment. There's no time to teach kids how to be critical. And yeah, one of our goals as in Fala-me is exactly that, to kind of foster that critical thinking and to fight misinformation at such a young age. And yeah, regarding the elderly, I think that's even more tricky because they have gone through a whole life of like experience, right? And it's kind of difficult sometimes to I don't know, get them away of certain like really framed ideas that they have about the world, and especially now, as you mentioned, with social media, that there's a lot of things to kind of filter about, I don't know, especially regarding neuroscience. That's why we're here, actually. But there's a lot of misinformation about neuroscience, mental health, and all those aspects. And I think the elderly are particularly targeted in a way. I can see it from my parents, for example. Well, my grandparents, they don't have social media, so I don't know. But for example, my parents, they don't have that sort of reasoning or that knowledge to really filter what's right or what's wrong. And also they have not been trained as a scientist, of course, which kind of difficult things even more because they don't know how to look for sources, correct sources, and so on. So I think it's an added difficulty, not only the fact that they have sort of an experience behind them, but also the fact that most of them are not trained in kind of going for the facts and going for the science behind the facts. Yeah, but I mean, we're trying to do that right now. It's difficult, especially like in specific spots like senior universities. I think that's being well done in general. But if you go and do like public events to people and you come across with elderly people, it's quite difficult, I would say, to tackle that sort of misinformation and to really go around it.
Okay.
I don't know if
So
I
Hedi,
answered.
yeah, of course. Hedi, do you think that, so going again back to the first question, so because we want to improve this for the elderly, so that's why we should start with young kids or teenagers. So how do you see that the work that you are currently doing could help this? So do you really think that science communication can help? Of course, I have an opinion, but how can we further improve on this?
So I spend a lot of my time writing press releases for the papers that come out of labs such as Joaquim's, and that's one part of my job, and that typically will be consumed by readers of publications in Portugal and abroad, because we share those press releases with media outlets, and so that's one way of getting the message across to people. But of course, now many people consume scientific content audio-visually. So that can be through television, it can be through social media, podcasts. And so there's an onus on science communicators to maybe move away, continue doing these more traditional forms of communication, but also, picking up some new skills in these other areas of communication, in order to be able to reach people where they are. And so, you can't expect people to come find you. You have to go looking for them sometimes. And that's one of the things we've just done, as I say, with this podcast project, because, and this is something, having spoken with, I just came from, spent a month in London speaking with science communication teams there. And they are now also trying to find new ways of reaching their audience, and just launched a podcast project as well as a print magazine, which they're now publishing. So I think that's one way of doing it, and it's not easy. I mean, when we were during the pandemic, for example, we held kind of video seminars, much like this one, in order to reach not just schools, but members of the public, including elderly people. And again, kind of reaching out to them, trying to find them where they are, because it's not always easy to get people's attention. We're swamped with so much information now more than ever. The media landscape is more fragmented now, I think, than it has ever been. It used to be a lot easier to get everyone to consume the same content at the same time, but now people consume different content at different areas of kind of social media and television channels, and also at different times. So it's really hard to get to broadcast your message to a wide audience. So we've seen that particularly with Twitter, for example. We no longer post content on Twitter because we noticed a huge drop-off of activity there. And unfortunately, scientists now, there's no one place where you can get your message across, and so it means having to maybe try and get your content on multiple different channels, which can be a bit tricky. So yes, it's not easy, but I think it's by embracing these new forms of communication and going to where the audience is, particularly, as I say, this emphasis on audio-visual consumption, I think that's where things are moving.
Okay, thank you. Joaquim, so how do you think you as a researcher can help to provide resources for school teachers? So we are going always or keeping in the same direction. So because they are really the people that are now in the front line, and as who you was just saying, so some parents, they don't know, and we need to better provide information for these school teachers, particularly important, I would say, in these teenage years. So do you think that we could help them some way? So we tried this at SPN, or do you see that we could try to do more? Because we have this in the Semana Brain Awareness Week, right? But should we do something else? Not only us, SPN, but, neuroscience community.
Yeah, so one of the simplest ways to help is to say yes whenever we are engaged by schools, for example. So find time away from our busy schedule and stop and participate in activities in schools whenever we are requested. Throughout the years, whenever I can. I've tried to engage in this kind of activities that are open to the broader public. I would say not so much with in schools, but other researchers in my group have engaged with teaching in early, like in like first grade, and then even a bit in the later stages of education. So I think that one of the things is being available is, I think it's very important to show that scientists are open and to have the opportunity to talk about science, because I think that one main aspect of how can we also fight misinformation is to put the scientific methods back in the center of how knowledge is obtained, and explain the scientific method made like over and over again and repeated throughout the different years of education, because it is understanding the scientific method also helps a lot to understand when information is misinformation or not. So I think that's one of the things that we can do is to engage this younger audience in what is the process that is underlying the work we do. And then more formal stuff, I think that we could do it, and maybe we should start thinking about doing it, because there are now cheap tools that you can use even to bring more let's say physiological approaches to study neuroscience to schools, right? Like stuff from backyard brains and stuff like that, which is very easy to do very simple experiments that could really engage the students in doing like a sample of what is being done when you're trying to discover things in neuroscience. And because these things are now cheaper and could be organized, you can imagine in a package where science clubs and then interested teachers could be supported to acquire one of these kits and then engage in a set of experiments throughout a year that could engage students with neuroscience. So I think that there's more we can do, and I think we want to do it so that we can start early on fighting misinformation by explaining what is really the best known method to humankind, to get knowledge, which is a scientific method. I think that's a very important message we need to keep saying. Like we have a very good method to acquire knowledge. It's the scientific method, and it has certain rules. And if you use them in your everyday life to understand if the knowledge you're getting is trustworthy or not, then you can have a tool that you can use throughout your life.
Okay, thank you. I agree. And I'm thinking also as what we can do more as a society. We should think about that later. Rui, so one question was, how do we measure the true impact? I'm asking to you and then to Hedi, actually the same question, the true impact of our communication. So the communication that currently you are doing, your team is doing in Fala-me Neuro. So how do you have any way of measuring the impact, or for you, when I say you, is your team, this is not really an issue, so you really want to more inform people rather than looking at the impact?
Yeah, I would say the latter, it's more important for us at the moment. Of course, to then apply for funding and so on, we have to have some metrics for impact. But I would say that informally getting the message across and really educating people, it's what drives us. I would say in general, measuring true impact, quote unquote, it's super difficult because you can all have now with the social media and TV kind of metrics and so on, it's easier in a way. But I would say that if you want to measure true impact, you really have to be rigorous and sort of scientific about it. You have to have those sort of evaluating sheets, for example, for kids, when you do a sort of an activity, before and after sort of questionnaire or something like that. But it's super difficult if you do it in broad audiences, for example, younger kids, their parents and their grandparents, for example. It's difficult in a way to measure that sort of true impact, because you really don't know what really gets retained in the other side. So
yeah,
again,
because impact is not the number of likes. I know it's a measure, but it's not. This is not the true impact, I would say, right?
Exactly. But if you know, for funding agencies, that's what really
I
matters.
know.
How many people you reach, how many people
Yeah.
liked your posts or whatever.
But again, is this impact, of course, or are you really impacting or not? So this is another question.
We tried our best, but I will give the floor to Hedi because he's way more experienced than I am. So yeah, go for it.
Yeah, well, I think I agree. I don't think impact is about just counting clicks, likes, or event attendance. I think those are really surface indicators. And the deeper question is whether our communication helps create a more thoughtful, better informed public conversation about science. I mean, I think to me, that's where the truest form of impact lies. So it's something that is maybe a bit more subtle but long lasting, and it's reflected in how people talk about science, how much they feel part of it, and whether they see you know, researchers as approachable and honest. Rui, you mentioned, you know, activities with children. I mean, this is something that we do at the Champalimaud Foundation. We do a lot of outreach. So we have, for example, a mentoring program, Ciência de Nos Maneiras, Science Our Way, where we connect scientists with hundreds of students from underserved schools. And we also have an initiative, Science on the Walls. This is a grassroots project where we, again, trying to go where people are, and to kind of teach them about science and try and make science a fun process, right? Because science is fun. You know, that's something it can be easy to forget, but it's a lot of fun. And so by kind of getting that enthusiasm and the fun side of science to kids from an early age, I think is definitely, and you can see the impacts there in the classroom, right? I mean, it's immediate. You know, you don't need to whip out an algorithm to measure that. And so I think as well, you know, one way we could measure impact of my press releases, for example, would be to look at the number of clippings. That's, you know, how many media outlets have picked up a press release and then published it on their platforms. And, you know, that's I think still a meaningful measure of how we're getting the message across, but it's by no means the only one. And you know, I think that's, as I say, why trying to engage audiences in, I think, quality over quantity as well. I think the quality of the exchange is more important than how many, you know, how many kind of media outlets picked up your press release. And I find that so it kind of depends on what your goal is, but certainly a very effective way of getting the message across is having in-person events or online ones like this one, and engaging people in kind of new ways, such as through kind of even through platforms like TikTok, for example. So I was meeting with one institute in London. We don't have a TikTok channel yet at the Champalimaud Foundation, but we may well do, because we have a lot of people engaging with TikTok, and actually there's some really incredible scientific content now on TikTok. For example, just teaching kids in a, or adults even, you know, because many people don't know what the process is of making fly food. So many labs use flies as their model, but obviously you need to feed flies to keep them alive. How do you do it? And so, you know, we have some really cool behind the scenes videos on TikTok now, which show speak to people working in these platforms, not just the scientists, but those who support the scientists in their work. A very important part of the process. And it kind of gives people a flavor of how science is done, and how it can be fun.
Thank you. Joaquim, so how can we, so this question is very interesting, which was, how can we disseminate good science when, for example, so the example was this one from US, when the US government does not?
Wow, tricky one.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? It's hard. You need to be very courageous in a way, right? Because you are going to go against very powerful people, but the bottom line is you stick with the scientific methods, like you stick with how knowledge is obtained. And but the tricky part is that most of the time, this other misinformation is much more attractive, right? It's very compelling. It's like something which you already are worried about, like that treatment drugs are bad for you, so you're already thinking like that. So somebody now comes up and says, oh, this treatment drug that you take often is very bad, right? Then it is very appealing to engage in that kind of information because it's so connected to what you instinctively think about, right? And so that's the big problem. Like, how can you do it? Especially if you are very careful. Like Hedi and I have had a lot of changes over the years, and I know we will confirm this, that I am very bad at making my science known, because I focus probably too much on what's like the details and what we really know about what we did, and not so much maybe about larger implications of what we did. And that's the problem, right? It's that it's very hard to Hedi was saying science is fun, and it is. It can be very, very attractive, some of the things which are done, but it's also very easy to go down the slope of, I am competing against this misinformation, so I am going to, make lighter on the facts part and reality. In reality, what are my results, and try to, make it a more general and like more appealing thing. But it is really kind of fighting fire with fire, right? Which is, it's very easy to then start to conveying information which is not accurate, right? So it is a very, very delicate balance, but I think that it's going to come up to people like Hedi, Rui, people that are engaging in science communication, to find this better ways of making science communication appealing in such a way that once you hear the two sides of the story, people can give, as much weight to what is coming out of the scientist's mouth as it is coming out of this high-profile people, right? Of course, the case in the US, I think is also important to say that it's not generalizable, right? It's a very important country, very important also in the science production part, but I would say as the governments go and as westernized governments go, they are a bit isolated in this kind of rhetoric where they have people in power which are fundamentally pseudoscientists. They are fundamentally, they like pseudoscience and they engage in pseudoscience deliberately, right? I don't think that you see that often. So I don't know how much of a concern that particular thing is versus, in general, all of the misinformation that exists nowadays, right? Like influencers, there's a lot of misinformation and pseudoscience coming out of influencers, and people pay a lot of attention to these people. So in general, I think it's a broader problem. Like, and I feel personally very difficult to me to solve this problem. How can I communicate my science in an attractive way, but still be truthful to my scientific method and how much like this equation of accuracy versus attractiveness, right? But I guess Hedi can maybe say something about this, and we also.
Maybe I will ask one question because it goes very in line with that. Because one question was, how can we motivate researchers in our institute? So Hedi, I believe you have to do that, to recognize the importance of communicating science effectively. So strategies, tools that we use. And so this goes in line what Joaquim was saying, that I think it's, of course, important. I also see this as a researcher, not to oversell it, but also you need to make it appealing. So how do you do that? Strategies that you use to, join both worlds that sometimes they don't look so easy to join.
You asking me?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So yeah. So just to to pick up on what Joaquim was saying, and your previous question, and then I'll come to the second one. Yeah, I think we are seeing in many areas a pushback against science, and often kind of driven politically. And so I think it's really important that we have scientists informing the policymakers and engaging the policymakers, making sure that conversation happens, and that the best information we have right now is what informs policy. So that's now very much a political thing, and we saw this during the pandemic, right? We saw that there was a lot of kind of anti-vaccine sentiment, and so one of the ways we tried to combat that was through this anti-vaccination campaign I mentioned earlier. So we quite a few science communicators kind of got together, and we kind of reached out to schools and members of the public to try to really combat some of the misinformation that was out there, to take the public understanding of risk, for example. Many people are more afraid of getting onto a plane. I was on a plane today, for example, than getting into a car, even though the statistics, the odds of being in a fatal plane accident are 1 in 11 million, whereas the chances of dying in a car crash are something like 1 in 5,000. So this vaccination awareness campaign that we ran was one way in which we were, I think, able to really tackle this misinformation. And to reiterate a point I mentioned earlier about kids, trying to get kids to be critical thinkers, trying to get people to think for themselves. I think that's really important. There's a funny story I like to tell from Adlai Stevenson's 1956 presidential campaign, where a woman from the audience shouted to him, "Senator, you have the vote of every thinking person," to which the senator replied, "That's not enough, madam. We need a majority." So getting people to be critical thinkers, I think, is absolutely crucial. And then to your second point about trying to get scientists to appreciate the importance of get their work communicated. There's something, a phrase that gets bandied around very often. I'm sure you've heard it. Science isn't finished until it's communicated. That's true in the world of, just the publishing a paper, that is a form of communication, right? And that is absolutely fundamental to the scientific process. Unless you publish, then there's nothing, there's nothing, right? So it's not finished until you communicate. But many people don't read papers, and so that's where the importance of not just publishing your paper, but also reaching people through other ways of telling people about your work in other ways becomes very important, because very few members of the public even have access to many of these papers that are locked behind paywalls, as we know. So so I think here at Champalimaud we create many opportunities. We just communicated these opportunities to the researchers here of how they can get involved in concrete ways in science communication. Examples of outreach efforts that we are doing, and that's very effective. We had a lot of researchers come back to us and say, yes, I would like to be part of I would like to be part of the science communication effort. Let's do it. So I think it's definitely important for a science communication team like ours to not just be looking outside of Champalimaud, but also looking inside to try and foster that interest in science communication, which many scientists have. As I was saying before we started recording, science communication was something I did all the time during my PhD, because science research these days is very niche, and so you still, even within a single lab, you may have very different kinds of projects happening. And so it becomes very important to communicate your research effectively to your other team members so they can understand what you're doing and help you. So yeah, I think and getting people to researchers during their masters or their PhD or whatever to speak in public. I think that's a really important skill, and to speak in public about their work to other researchers and ideally also to members of the public.
Can I just
of course,
add? So another thing that's been happening, which is also, I think, a step in the right direction, is that funding agencies now, when they call for your narrative CVs, there are items there of outreach, and so where scientists are now, it makes, even it should be obvious, but when it's not obvious, once these organizations, the funding agencies, start asking you, what are you doing in outreach? So how are you communicating your science outside of the paper circuit? It also makes the scientists more aware of the need to do it. I think that's a good movement in the right way. And then I just want to pick up on two things that Hedi said, or at least one of the things, which is about the probability. And I think that going back to the previous questions, etc., one of the ways to also combat misinformation is to teach the earliest possible about probability and statistics in the most simple way possible, because many of the misinformation things come out of just people not understanding that we live in a probabilistic world. And another thing, which is probability and also causality, like teach fairly early on what is causality, how do you ascertain causality. Those two things, I think, are the seeds to combat misinformation early on. So if we could have some teaching that's focused on simple examples like that, I think that would be very important. I will give this example. There was one of these pros and contras, this TV show about vaccination. There was an old doctor in the audience, and he was very upset. This was like a vaccination thing. He was like saying, "Oh, I'm not anti-vaccination, but you need to really think through this thing. For example, last year nobody died from smallpox in the US, but there were like dozens of cases of fatalities due to the smallpox vaccination. So we need to think about it, right?" So he was kind of saying it's a very concrete kind of thinking, not understanding what's underlying the causality, nexus in this connections, right? Of course, nobody dies because there's vaccination. So what's left to happen is the complications of the vaccination. But as soon as you take out vaccination, the hundreds of thousands of people will die like they died before, right? And it's not smallpox. I'm mistranslating. It was, sorry, I cannot remember right now under stress. Polio, sorry, it was polio. Okay, so it was polio vaccination, I think it was. I'm not sure now, but some kind of vaccination. Oh no, it was measles. Sorry, now I remember. It was measles vaccination. Sorry, one of those very important, very well controlled diseases with vaccination. Okay, smallpox is eradicated. That's why it couldn't be smallpox. Sorry. All right. So yes, I just want to say that's like probability, teaching about probability, teaching about causality, how we ascertain it. I think it's a very important point to combat misinformation.
Can I just pick up on that?
Yeah,
And I think I wanted to go back to what Joaquim said about how accurate the scientists can be and not fall into the dangers of being so attractive that you lose the information around it. I think that's where most scientists really struggle, because they have not been trained for that. That's the first thing. And yeah, teaching about correlation, causation. Yeah, most people don't know what that means. If you think about it, I can, again, giving the example of my parents, if I tell them what correlation or causation means, they have no clue. So really, most of the lay people out there, especially in social media, they don't know what this means. And I would say, even going a step further, they are really influenced by what all these sort of people, very well-known people, influencers, whatever, are saying. And most of these people don't know what they're saying, and they don't know the facts behind it. So I think it's up for us, not only as a society, to train a bit more people on this sort of aspects from since they are really little kids. I know most kids don't like probabilities. Well, I didn't, so yeah, I would say that yeah, most kids don't like maths, for example, and that's an issue as well. They do like science, however, and it's quite interesting to see that sort of um, yeah. I don't know. I would argue also that if people could uh, could be more with scientists, so engaging people more with scientists. If institutions would call people, now there's a sort of a hot topic, citizen science, which kind of is involving people into the science process, and that's quite interesting. But I don't think that's enough, actually. I think scientists have to make that extra effort. I know it's difficult to get out of that bubble of science, of doing science and going out there and speak about your science. But I think we do need to make that extra step to inform people and to educate people. Sorry.
No.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I just a very brief thing. I think one of the most biggest problems we have is that even our outreach, not all of them, but some of the outreach stuff we do, especially through social media, it's only going to meet people that are already engaged,
Yeah,
that are already scientifically literate, that are already right. And I think that's a big challenge, and that's why I was saying like focus on teaching, right? On when a kid is in school and you have this opportunity to teach in general people, right? Of course, it's not bulletproof, but I always worry that we are engaging already the interested people.
Yeah.
And sometimes, depending on the events, it can work. Like we did the European researchers night, right? And then I was with the people from the vivarium working on this part on informing about animal research. And then it was in this marina place, and some people were just passing by, older people, in fact, and they just got curious, but they were not there because of the scientific night. And in fact, it was the most interesting conversation we had because they were like completely clueless about the stuff happening there. And it was really interesting. And I think that's a big challenge, one we should work at, which is how can we meet the people that are not engaged in this conversation?
Joaquim is very right, because in this European Researchers' Night, for example, in Lisbon, one of the spots was in the museum. And for that, so I was also there. And so people, they had to want to go there. And so it was people that were already engaged, of course, even so parents were engaging and they brought their children. So it's still good, of course, but I think other places did. I think in Coimbra they did in the streets, in the downtown, and they were telling me that it was also very interesting because they were receiving people that were just passing by, and it's different public. So this is also very important. So I have another question, Rui, and this is, I think, more to you because this is a question specific for a junior researchers, not now as a Fala-me Neuro, but for a junior researcher. So when it comes to social media, what do you think is the best way to approach science communications for you as a junior researcher? Okay, so when you have your data published or before, how do you see these?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I never really engaged myself like individually. So it was always with a team behind. Well, sometimes I post things about my science, but not really like major outputs. I would say that you really have to be cautious about the message that you really want to come across and to pass to people. And again, being very accurate, but also very make it in an attractive way. And that requires some sort of skill, I would say, that you need to train, and you need to kind of push that skill a little bit. I mean, when I started Fala-me, I had no clue about how to engage people really. And then we kind of built our process within the team to do that. But I would say that if you want to do that as a junior researcher and go out in the wild and and engage people in social media, as niche as your research is, I think there's always people that want to hear about it. Not only social media, but also elsewhere, like in the streets. Of course, don't go randomly on the streets, but in events like this, in the European Researchers Night, in the Brain Awareness Week events, and even local events that at your hometown, for example, go to your schools really and talk about your research. I think you need to start somewhere, right? So if you really are interested in engaging or developing that skill a little bit more, I would say that there's room for it and there's people that want to hear about it. But I want to stress what Joaquim was saying, because it's really, really tough to get the people that do not want to hear about it. I think that's where most of us in the science communication world struggle the most, to reach those audiences. I think that's where the money is really is on. So if you want to fight misinformation, you really have to reach those people. But I know it's difficult, and there's no magic formula. You just gotta do what you gotta do. Keep on doing the best you can, really. Whenever you can, in the formats that you really, because I wanted to tackle a little bit what Hedi was saying about how different formats reach different audiences, because we've been noticing at Fala-me that it really is like that. Most younger audiences are now on Instagram and TikTok, for example, whereas adults or elderly people are more like into podcasts and so on. And they don't go to the papers. I would say 1% of the population goes and reads papers. So you really need to know your audience. That's another advice for young researchers. At Fala-me, we try to go as broad as we can, but if you want to go for a specific audience, just adapt the format that you're using. I think that's really crucial.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, if you could give your opinion on this,
yeah, no, I think, as I say, so we try and do outreach work and go to where people are who may normally, think of science as something that's just not for them, but to try and make them see that, I mean, that's part of some of these mentoring schemes I was mentioning earlier, which is trying to make them see that they could be a scientist. Scientists are people just like they are, and there are no barriers to becoming a scientist, right? And so there you're physically going to where the people are. So that's one way of doing it. And what Rue was saying about tailoring your message to different audiences, I think that's essential, right? You can't just have one blanket, one size fits all approach to this. Especially given how fragmented things are, as we were talking about, you'll need to tailor that message to different audiences of different ages. And that means, I tend to think of it more as layering than simplifying. So kind of if you're speaking with the children, for example, you would just be able to relate the core of the message using terms that they can relate to. And then if you're speaking to older people, then you can add more layers onto that. But always kind of tweaking the message depending on who you're talking to try and make that communication more effective.
Yeah, so we don't have so much time, but I have still several questions that are very interesting. One is, and Hedi, this is for you because I think that people still don't know very well how this. So you have this press release, how this goes then, and is selected to be in really public. You know, it's really published by newspaper. So the question was, who decides what is new? What is a new in science? It's journalists, researchers, academia. Can you explain a bit the process so that people understand?
Yes, yeah. So it's becoming increasingly hard now to get studies on basic research published by the media. So normally the media, so they tend to be the ones, the journalists tend to be the ones who make that decision based on what they think the public, you know, us, is interested in. So they will have a bias towards now kind of research. So if research doesn't have a human connection, a direct human connection, or if it's not a kind of world first in the technology that it's using, then it's very difficult for basic research to get wide coverage in the media. And this is something, as I say, that I've speaking with other SciComm teams in Europe, you know, this is something they struggle with as well. And so they will reach out to journalists that they know, give them a call and say, hey, we have this study coming up. What do you think? Do you think we can make it a press release? Is it going to get coverage or not? And what would have got coverage 10 years ago now probably might not get much coverage at all, because many science journalists are leaving publishers and not getting replaced. And so there is a paucity of science journalists compared to previously, and of course that makes it harder for members of the public to see basic research. So that's why there is a bias towards research that has a very direct human connection, and so that's. But I think a really important part of science communication is making people understand how important just basic research is. You know, so much of what we know has come from basic research, and so we really need to counter this this kind of increasing lack of interest in basic research and get to see it, people to see it as something that is crucial for scientific discoveries.
Yeah, but you know, it's interesting because I have another question which is in a bit opposite direction, which is, so this person, this member that sent was, how can researchers that are working in this basic neuroscience, in this case, share their work and its implications, but without making people think that they are providing the answers to their problems? Because this is the other thing, which is, and we already had this also in our lab, which is we are, you know, looking at this niche, something very specific, and suddenly in the news is like we discovered the cure for Alzheimer's disease. Okay, so how really can we, you know, we want our work to be shared, but we don't want to.
I'll just quickly say something before I let Joaquim and Rui pick it up. But for example, I'll just give you a very quick example. We had a paper come out from the Mainen lab that was part of the International Brain Laboratory, and they recorded from more than 500,000 neurons over hundreds of brain areas, representing 95% of the mouse brain volume. And then a Wired magazine, quite a well-known publication, took this press release and went with the headline, "This is the first time scientists have seen decision-making in a brain." And that's Wired magazine, right? So that is oversimplification. Okay, and that's, I think, but I want to be fair to the journalists there, because they are under they have a tough time, because it's really hard to get eyeballs on basic research. So they try and, oversell it in this case. But I can understand the pressures that they are facing, right? from the editor, the person who wrote that, I'm guessing, you know, placing pressures from the editor to try and get people to read it. But you know, that's not that's not something we want to do. Is oversell. It's something we want to avoid.
But we cannot, as at least I understood, I learned that we cannot ask people to people, journalists. I cannot ask them to give me the piece before so that I can correct, you know. So it's also I don't know, how do you see this? But it's true that at least this is something that the journalists explained me, that this is not really journalism if we are asking to correct
the
piece.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's also, you probably I mean, you don't have time, right, to correct if the publisher sends their piece to you before they publish it. There's just not the time there to get those corrections made, and so it's tricky. But I think building trust between the journalists and the scientists is one way of tackling that.
So we have more questions. I don't know. We don't have time, I think. Daniela, right? We need to finish. But maybe I will leave just 1 minute for Joaquim and Rui to finish and go out with these questions. And then I have other questions that then I can share with you all. I think they are interesting, and it's good to think about it. Joaquim, if you can finalize and going through what Hedi was saying.
Yeah. Hedi knows how this is sensitive to me, and how I'm probably I'll be best left, you know, science communicators alone when they are doing their reports, because it's very hard for me as a scientist, as Mariana is saying in this comment she now put in our chat. It's very hard as a scientist to know where I can let go of the precision and in the sake of providing the information to a wider public, right? So I found it really important to have science communicators working with me, so I can, you know, kind of I have this secondary validation. Like Hedi, he comes to me, he has already something written, right? So it's not me imposing an idea, and then it also, if I trust the science communicator, then if he's writing something which is a bit more, or can be a bit more general, and I wouldn't write it, but if he writes that after reading my work, I am more confident. Then it's not, you know, an overstatement, it's not stepping too far. So I think it's very important to have, you know, science communicators working with us, because they really help in this part. They can, it's like this check and balance thing where they can help me to not be too conservative. I can in a way balance also if I feel that they are being too pressured to get the press release, to get traction. So I can also work as the opposite balance. So I think that's a very important part, is to have that can work with you, and it's specialized in science communication. I think that's one important thing. And then there is also just a quick, because Mariana put this question in the chat about artificial intelligence. If it's too much, I don't know for science communication, but my golden rule right now with AI is to use it to improve what I have already written, and not to get written stuff out of it. So I write first, and then I use it to make it better, like make it more perceptible, simpler, you know, but never get text directly out of it. That's my golden rule. I don't know if that helps your point, Mariana, but so Rui, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to echo what you guys said, because I think in a way it's I was just reading Mariana's comments, and I was thinking to myself, yeah, it's tough, right? The relationship with AI, I think you need to establish your own rules, and even within the institutes, that they have to be clear. How the use of AI, how you use it, and for science outreach, how can you use it to just improve the message, not really create the message. I just wanted to go through what Mariana said in the second point. definitely a communications department is really, really helpful. Most institutions now have them, or they at least have one person to go to talk about your science and to do all these press releases and so on. But I think if you want to do it on yourself, there's also room for it, really. Joaquim was saying that he relies on people from his team as well that do science communication and that have that sort of different vision of what might be, or that double check step, extra step. And yeah, talking about fundamental science, talking about animal experimentation, it's tough. I mean, most people don't know what that means or how that translates into their daily lives. So, but if you really want to kind of deconstruct things a bit and have that, I'd say that most of the science communication that I do, it's on my extra time. So I think if you're willing to put that extra effort, it's also nice. But if you want to specialize yourself into that sort of path, there's also room for it. And now in Portugal, there's many institutions that really want that. So, and there's also institutions that are training scientists nowadays to have that sort of career as well. So, yeah, there is a lot of room out there, and I'll just leave with a brief cheesy message. I think we try our best, really, especially targeting people that don't that are really not engaged into science, and I think that's the trickiest part of it all. But if we go to, I was thinking about the example that Eddie said. We also do that. If we go to underserved communities, for example, I think those are the best places where brilliant students, brilliant people are, and they can absorb science like crazy. They are sponges, really, and you wouldn't think about that. But it gets there. It gets there. The message gets there in a way. So yeah.
And anyone can be a science communicator, right? You don't have to have a science degree to do it. I mean, I remember my father, one of my earliest memories, he was explaining to me what evaporation, what happens when water turns into an invisible gas called water vapor. And I said I didn't believe him. I said I don't believe in it. So he said, okay, I'll do a little experiment. And he took a little drop of water, he put it on a plate, and he said, let's see if it's there tomorrow morning. So we went to bed, woke up the next morning, and it was gone. There was no, and that stayed with me, right? Just that, okay, that I can see it with my own eyes. Evaporation, I believe it.
That's cool, very cool. So thank you so much.
Very briefly, I just can want to add one thing.
For me, we could be on. I'm looking at Daniela.
I was thinking that I kind of sounded that you can only do this well if you have a scientific communication, office working with you, which is great if you have, but if you don't have, you should anyway try to share your science. And I was thinking one thing to do is what we do when we're writing a grant or writing a paper, which is share with colleagues
and ask for help.
And test. Yeah, I have this post I want to make. I have this text I have that I want to do to share the paper that I published. What do you think about it? Get feedback, from as much people that you can. And then some people that are not so maybe scientifically connected. What do you think? I think maybe that's also a way to go if you don't have access to like an official kind of science of the communication department. What do you say, Eddie?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, as I say, I mean, you can do science communication in your own home, with your kids. You can do it in the local community center. So there's you can go online. There are any number of opportunities, to get your message across. So if you don't have access to science communicators, then don't despair. And if anyone is thinking about this and wants to reach out to me, please feel free to do so. Always
Same.
happy to chat about this anytime.
Me too.
Oh, thank you so much. Super interesting, and we had still open questions, but I think most of them were, they are all a bit connected, and I think it was a really nice, a bit more than 1 hour seminar in which we were discussing. I think it's very important for our community and, of course, for all public in general. So thank you so much, and I give you, Daniela, the stage.
Well, thank you so much, Hedi, Juli, and Joaquim, for sharing your insights and your experiences that are so different. And also Sara for guiding the session so smoothly. And all the members for sending questions, so many questions. And I hope you enjoyed the round table and see you on the next SPN seminar. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.